who work in IT, what's the wildest thing you've discovered had to do while at work? Story 1. Back when I first started ages ago, a woman called in and said my mouse isn't working. I asked her if it was wired or wireless. I don't know. Why would I know that? What do you mean? Is it wired or not? Is there a wire on it? I said I don't know. This isn't my job to know, it's yours. So I asked her if she picked it up and walked away. How far would she get? I was the one that got in trouble. Story 2. My husband does not work in IT, but he should. He worked on a facilities team at an expensive private school, and one day got a ticket to remove trash a 75-inch TV. He approached the head of the IT department asking why he needed to trash it when he had just installed it brand new. The head of IT told him it won't stop shutting off. My husband loaded it into the work van and dropped it at our house instead. Later he came home, plugged it in, and turned off the 10-minute automatic power off timer. We got a fancy TV for free. Story 3. Got called to investigate unplug a laptop that had viruses detected on it. When I arrived, this laptop was in the open with the login information taped to the desk. This laptop was given local admin privileges by someone before my time for some application. This was in an office area that was always unlocked and 10 steps from the entrance of the building. No one was in the office as they went home early, including management. On a laptop filled with everyone's information, SSN, names, addresses, and more, LimeWire, games, pornography, and more. The two who worked on this laptop just used it like their personal laptop, with occasional work being done on it. The laptop was promptly disconnected from the network, confiscated, and returned for analysis. Yes, there was spyware, and we don't know how much personal info got out. This was reported to higher management. The two who used it disappeared quickly and quietly after that. Story 4. Walked all the way across campus in the Florida heat just to tell a PhD professor that the reason their monitor kept turning off every few seconds was because the computer was in fact turned off. Then got yelled at for her classroom not being ready for her when she came in. Also was told to make sure these projectors aren't in the building by the end of day. Don't care where they go, just that they aren't here tomorrow by my boss. It was more expensive to buy new bulbs for them than to just buy new ones, so that's how I ended up with 5 projectors that lasted years. Story 5. Big company, couple of hundred users, each with their own network drive hot desking scenario so they could get their docs, no matter where they sat in the call center rest of building. The server that housed the home drives, as we called them, was running low on disk space, so we sent out emails to everyone saying the shared drives were for work docs only, and that we could see images, MP3s, MOV files, etc., and that these should be deleted if not work-related. Fast forward a few weeks, and the disk usage has gone down, but still really close to full, so the lowest paid member of staff, me, was to find the worst culprits and report back on what the largest content in their drive was. The very first person I checked had a huge drive, most under 500 MB. This was tens GBs, sorted by size, 2 GB, MOV file, named totally randomly with numbers like 93829Z8432Z834. Opened it, CP, FML. The subsequent police-led shit show was not what I needed to be involved in at 19 years old. Story 6. Drive to an office for emergency on-call service, charging the client $400 an hour to plug the power back into a switch which their cleaning staff had knocked loose. Story 7. My colleague got a call from a customer who was a pastor as he needed help with his computer. It was a weekend, and my colleague knew his machine name, so he remotely logged onto it as he in parallel started calling him. Screen loads, and it's playing lesbian on his work computer in the church. Needless to say, it was awkward as the pastor answered the call a few seconds later. Story 8. Oh, story time. Let's name my college Mike. It's not his real name, for reasons that will become obvious. Mike was our top help desk guy, always happy to help out and to guide you through your problem until it was fixed. In the decade I've worked here, I've never seen him get angry at a client. One day, Mike receives a ticket from the VP of our company. VP claims she can no longer log into the system and requests help. Of course, Mike hurries up to her office because that's a pretty big problem, especially for a VP. When he gets to the office, he sees that VP is able to log in. But the system is now demanding she sets up 2-factor authentication. Mike is not surprised by this. 2FA has recently gone from a suggestion to a requirement, so he figures she has difficulties with setting up 2FA and starts explaining how to pair her phone and how everything works. But nope, VP knows what 2FA is and how it works. She just doesn't want it. She demands Mike make it go away. Mike is confused, but declines. 2FA has become mandatory, like I said, and he can't simply make it go away. So he explains again that it's required and that she, as VP, is especially crucial to set it up properly. Even the CEO has it set up and has been using it since it was first introduced. But VP is adamant. She demands an exception and demands it now. But Mike refuses again, mostly because he literally does not have the power to do what she asks, even if he wanted. So, VP takes the next logical step. She calls up the CTO. The CTO is absolutely baffled. All he was told by VP is that Mike is refusing to help her, and he knows that Mike is our top help desk guy. He wouldn't just randomly refuse help. He marches up to the VP's office to get the finer details. After about 15 seconds of explaining, he instantly sides with Mike and tells VP that she's out of luck and that 2FA is mandatory, no exceptions. Probably realizing she can't just bully the CTO into submission, she finally relents and agrees to set up the 2FA. Mike quickly helps her through, and 5 minutes later they're out of the office. A few hours later, Mike is called by one of VP's assistants. None of them can log in anymore, they claim. Mike goes back up and guesses they probably are also confused by the now mandatory 2FA. And in a way, they were. As it turns out, they couldn't log in anymore because they were logging in with VP's account. A bit of questioning later, and the truth comes up, VP has simply been giving out her username and password to her entire team, 20 people, so they can do her work for her. That's why she was so adamant on not setting up 2FA. With 2FA enabled, her cronies can now no longer simply log into her account. She now has to constantly go around and hand out her 2FA token, or, God forbid, do her own work. Mike raises this obvious security concern with his manager, who, according to rumors, facepalms, and immediately escalates the issue. Higher and higher it goes, with facepalms all the way, until it comes back to the CTO, who facepalms the hardest, and mutters of course she did. He schedules an urgent cybersecurity training for her, which she declines. CTO calls her office and explains in quite certain words that this training is not optional, and she is expected to be there. Last I heard, she did show up, and still has 2FA enabled. Story 9. We implemented content blocking for websites, stuff leak prawn, drugs, alcohol, etc., to only have to unblock for said construction client because the CEO liked to crank it in his office. Story 10. Someone recently called my help desk requesting that we clear the roads so she could get to work. The sky is falling and water's in the way, meaning it's raining really hard and the streets are flooded. As the IT help desk, of course, there's nothing we can do about that. Story 11. Lady from the office downstairs borrowed my boss's keyboard whilst waiting for a replacement. When hers arrived, she washed the borrowed one in the kitchen sink and left it on the draining board to dry out. Story 12. Explained to the chief technology officer that having the prod server and its backup server sat next to each other may well save cost on not having two data centers, but when that data center, also known as the stationary cupboard, goes, it's not such a money-saving idea. Story 13. Received a call from the FBI Cybercrime Division. Said be at a conference room at one of my healthcare clients in an hour. Got my team together and showed up. Was informed that a large medical practice that used our software had been infiltrated by a hacker that had posted a video of himself on some kind of dark site, walking around their large office 500,000 square feet and bragging about his expertise and claiming to own our network. They played us the video. He was employed there as the night security guard. We quickly saw that he did not gain access to our net. They informed us that he had given his notice and his last day would be Thursday. He has posted a bunch of threats to the dark site about what would happen that next holiday weekend after he was gone. It did turn out that he had gained access to the network of the surgery center in the same building, and he has used that access to remotely disable the HVAC system for hours at a time during surgical procedures. On his last day, the FBI rolled up at night, waited for the older security guard to leave the building to patrol the parking garage, then knocked out all power and lights to the big building, lock all the doors, pulled up in about 8 black vans, about 30 guys with submachine guns jump out, sweep the building, arrest him, and quickly leave. We were counseled to shut down the network for a week in case he had planted time bombs to be triggered near the 4th of July. We did. Turns out he had a young wife and 2 kids, was offered a plea deal for 3 years in prison, decided to go to trial. I was a witness. He was sentenced to 11 years. A twist. The pastor at his church testified as a character witness, said he had never had an issue with him. Turns out the FBI had hacked the church computers with a warrant and found that he had been fired as the IT guy at the church. Pastor was charged with perjury and sentenced to prison too. Story 14. Other workers screenshot her Windows screen, made it her background, then moved her taskbar off screen. She kept clicking start, but nothing would happen. Story 15. I had to remotely install a spyware program on a VP CFO's laptop because loss prevention was trying to gather information on him. The software recorded keystrokes, program usage, web history, and videos of what he was doing on the laptop. He resigned the next day after they found that he had a girlfriend in one of the company's manufacturing plants in China. The guy lost $1 million job for that. Probably lost his wife and home too. Story 16. Report CP to the FBI. Build a high-end DVD authoring PC. Think early 2000s for a high-ranking neo-Nazi. I was in a retail setting and didn't know who he was until after the fact. Got stitches in my face after having a desktop PC dropped on my head by a user who was just trying to help. Call the fire department and initiate a building evacuation after a backup battery started leaking hydrogen sulfide gas all over the place. Spend $75K on a workstation-grade computer meant for algorithmic traders who could make that money back in a fraction of a second on a good trade. Caught the VP of HR watching some, let's call it legally questionable at work because his headphones weren't working and he called for support before closing the tabs. Give sworn testimony during a business fraud case regarding the chain of custody of IT equipment. I spent 2 weeks evaluating the temperature output of various monitors because one high-maintenance user insisted that his monitors made his desk 1 to 2 degrees warmer than his neighbors, and he can't possibly be expected to work in those conditions. We got to throw a half-dozen servers off a roof. The servers were powering an old legacy system that everyone hated, and we finally got rid of. Story 17. I've been IT for 20 years, for military, government, and finance. 1. IT security guy built a server and using the military network to host his child site. 2. Virus hit the base early 2000s, spreading like crazy, made the decision to shut off all network gear, patch and clean each segment. 3. Same virus, got approval by base commander to run my untested code to remote connect, force patch, force reboot the entire environment, including the classified side. It worked great. Wrote it as I was tired of patching by hand. 4. Federal agency requested tech help on a case. Found myself breaking into a military location with a team to clone a hard drive undetected. We were 100 authorized but wanted no witnesses. 5. Got to drive across active runways with F-22s when they were still brand new blasting off. As I was working on an alert site, jets fully armed fueled to intercept. Bonus story, local PD kept ruining their detectors by pointing them at the planes. Active defenses would burn out the radar gun. 6. Before the current classified message system, the old one had all messages come into one location. Then we would read and call who it was for. When 911 occurred, got to read all the classified messages shooting around to the air defense sector I was in. 7. Pen testing traffic control systems, city Wi-Fi, and police cameras to see if we could compromise and commit crimes hypothetically. It has been awesome. Story 18. Got paged one night because of a data outage. Turns out one of our on-call response folks went into the server room, locked themselves in, and unplugged several machines. This caused several data outages, which caused a page and thus someone driving in to resolve it. This was a major military mission-critical system, and this guy thought the best way to get someone's attention was to break a bunch of stuff. Story 19. This wasn't at work but at a LAN party. Had a guy in a CS-16 tourney, had a system was constantly overheating and locking up. Opened it up to find it caked with dust. A few people split the job of cleaning it, and I was given the CPU heatsink. I didn't have my tools, and all I had was some plastic untinsels and with what was in the bathroom. The sink was too small to get the heatsink under it, and the knife was not getting it off. So I just stuck the heatsink in the relatively clean toilet. All of the caked dust and gunk came off. I was able to shake it off, put it under the air dryer, apply some thermal compound on it, and put it back in the machine. The other guys got the rest of the system cleaned up. I didn't tell him I flushed his heatsink in the toilet. Story 20. I just flicked a defective screen back to life not 2 minutes ago. Like a small laptop screen that just wouldn't turn on even after taking it out and putting it back in. Then I get uppity and flick it and boom. Actual craziest was a fired employee who was wildly underperforming coming to give back her laptop. I booted it up and she had a contract and pay slips from the other company she was working for with our stuff. She was dumb as a rock and HR tore through her case. Story 21. I worked at a computer repair store for a while out of college. One time, a guy brought in a PC and said that he had a virus on it after looking at. He was very explicit about his use and said that he kind of has a problem. I didn't think much of it because we see that stuff all the time. I took his desktop in, put it away, and didn't think about it again. Fast forward about a day later, we get to his PC in the queue, and I fire it up on our bench, which is open for people to see us work. A new customer comes in, and we start talking about her problem. All of a sudden, I hear insane moaning and turn around to see that the guy has like a 2-minute screensaver that somehow moans and flips through dozens of extremely hardcore in rapid succession. In a brief flash, me and this lady look at each other, and I look back to see the DP vaginal to insane bondage with 20 body piercings tied together. I ran over and pulled the plug and profusely apologized to the lady. She was surprisingly cool about it and said, "Yeah, I think that guy needs more help than I do right now." Holy. I ended up running an initial malware byte scan on it that found 38,000 infections, and his hardcore screensaver was still intact after we were done with remaining scans with other products and manual deletions. He was very thankful and I never saw him again, lol. Story 22. I walked into the office one morning to my CEO asking me to follow him to his office. He pulled out a stack of paper, almost a full ream, of printed from our network printer and asked me to find out who sent it. Back then, most of our office staff had their own desk printers. I assumed that this person had worked late and meant to print out these pics on his local printer. Our CEO only used the network printer near his office and gets to work well before everyone else. Obviously, dude was fired. Story 23. I discovered that a coworker liked to watch, Not Any, in which the actress is a clone of his wife. It's not deepfakes or anything like that. This happened before such technology was invented. The guy liked his wife so much that he watched of his wife's doppelganger while working. We did nothing about it because the guy was virtually unfireable for some reason. Emergency flight from CA to GA because they were getting alarms on their new system, flew out at like 4 a.m., got on site at 9 a.m., told to come back at 9 p.m., got a hotel, slept, came back on site 9 p.m. Customer stated that someone used a cable from the PDU to log into system but plugged it in wrong when done. But they were no longer getting alerts. I looked at it. It was correctly cabled. Apparently someone had noticed and put it back correctly. Left site and flew back home. 23-hour day just to look at a cable label. They probably got charged like 10K to have me go on site, if not more. Story 24. Not me, but a colleague had to sing a lullaby to a user because she said she needed to be calmed down. Had to might be the wrong word, but he did do it. She was insanely unstable when it came to service workers. She was the head economist at the specific company handling a lot of money. So she was basically babied no matter how many times we complained to her boss. She would call in screaming, refusing to let us do anything while expecting us to fix her problems telepathically. She had non-issues every day, so we basically existed so she could torture us. Story 25. Hiding a kill switch in the code of a web application we had because my boss thought the customer would try to steal our code. Just to add, my boss never used the switch, but they did steal our code. I already left the company, but as far as I know there's a lawsuit going on. I remember having to help my boss gather proof of it to share with the lawyers. Story 26. Worked with sheriffs to extract data from a computer that had been physically smashed by the owner. Had to see some photos of child abuse that turned my stomach. Would have been nice if they told me what we were looking for first, so I could have at least expected what I encountered. It must take a lot for cops to not simply shoot people that are found with that specific type of content. Story 27. I work with a lot of engineers like literal rocket scientists. The number of really intelligent people who don't know what simple things like, "Can you minimize that window?" or "Let me see your desktop" are, is simply mind-blowing. I am thankful every day that Teams added the ability to take control of someone's cursor. I feel like the more advanced a person's specialized knowledge becomes, the more rapidly their general knowledge declines. Some kind of weird inverse correlation. Story 28. IT problems are human errors, and it's usually because something is powered off. $200 to drive 5 miles just to hit the power button is more common than you think. Story 29. Late to the party, but an older man early 70s dropped off a USB drive with some files for us that he wanted processed. It was his drive by accident. Obviously not what he meant to leave with us. He had Word documents LMAO with full nudity, but pretty tame stuff. It reminded me of from the 80s. The best part were the captions he wrote underneath, like little stories that went with each photo. "Oh, you're a naughty one, aren't you? Would you like to stick your rod in me?" It was kind of endearing. Story 30. I had repaired a printer at the big insurance company. On the bill, I wrote mouse removal, NC. The client questioned my comment. "Printers don't have mice." I responded they're not supposed to. The furry little guy is in the plastic bag next to the printer. Ew. Story 31. As a consultant software dev, I got called into a client office on a Saturday to help fix a hardware issue because the regular IT staff was non-responsive. They sucked. We were changing a bad memory card on a server, and my boss asked me to unplug the top box. I was averaging about 90 hours a week, so I was cooked, and I unplugged the wrong machine. This was a travel agency call center doing 1M day, and this machine was in the call center server stack. We freaked out, of course, and my boss walked out onto the call center floor, quietly asking if everything was running okay lol. Luckily, it was a benign marketing server and everything was okay. Lesson learned, don't let the software dev in the server room. Story 32. I used to do IT work for a scrap company. These scrap companies are notorious for losing power because they're always in terrible parts of town with infrastructure that's falling apart. They rented a backup generator, but it only put out a certain amount of power, and I had to do this Apollo 13 mission to get as much of the network as I could up. But if we plugged in too many things, the generator's breaker would flip and we'd have to restart. The building itself also wasn't fully powered, so I was doing this while the lights were flickering, in 90°F heat with no air. No light or air circulation in the IT closet. We had to prop the door open to get any semblance of cooling into the closet. Story 33. I was a solo IT department for many years. Had to run manual backups on salespeople laptops. I run into a huge folder, check if it needs to be backed up. Turns out it was a ton of pics videos of the married sales guy and the young receptionist getting it on at a company event. The company used to get us all hotel rooms. I sat the guy down and said, I found some that shouldn't be on company property. He turned white as a ghost. I said it's all good if he deletes it, doesn't do that again. So I never told anyone about it. I would have found a way to tell the wife if I hadn't run into screenshots of their texts. The wife had recently found out about the affair. It was really messy, kids involved. Story 34. We had an after-hours call to the hospital we work at because our new unit secretary in the ER couldn't find the remote to the TV. They have that show where patients are located. It's also an application that's loaded onto every computer in the nurse station. She was fired a few days ago after trying to throw us under the bus for her up. Story 35. Working with the judicial system, it wasn't uncommon to see photo-video evidence of child abuse or neglect. People do some really up things to kids. Story 36. Back when I worked for an MSP, we did a lot of work for law firms. We were a turn-down service kind of MSP, so we did anything and everything requested of us so long as they were willing to pay for the time investment. Well, one law firm, who was a frequent flyer for me, was working a lawsuit where a bike rider was hit by a delivery truck. He was wearing an Apple Watch at the time and using the Garmin app to track his heart rate, which also showed his GPS location. I was asked to extract the data for them to use as proof of the timeline and specific location as that was being contested. Long story short, you can see in the data timestamps, GPS location, heart rate, and speed he was riding. There's clearly a point at which he was riding 15-20 meters and the suddenly stopped. His heart rate spiked and was irregular for a good while. Then he was moving at a much faster rate. This is in line with when the EMT picked him up, and he was being transported, and you can see his heart rate flatline for 20 seconds, spiking twice before beginning again. I'm pretty sure I watched a man die and get resuscitated through Excel. Story 37. The unfathomable amount of CP that I have come across both professionally and independently repairing computers is breathtaking. From mother to grandfathers, cops to mechanics, youngsters to old folks. It's pervasive and disturbs me. I have an in with one of the local PDs and drop a note each dime every time. No passes here. If I find it on your machine, so do the locals and the stadies. Story 38. IT for medical professionals. Big institution. Doctor brings in a dead laptop. They killed it by spilling something on it. They were stupid and didn't back up any data, so my task was to pull the drive and recover their files. Open up the laptop and learn it's full of body lice. Full. So I double-bag the laptop, call facilities to report an infestation. My shop gets tented and fumigated. Their lab gets the same treatment. Meanwhile, I leave work, drive to Walgreens, get a couple home delousing kits, drive home, strip down in the backyard and delouse myself. May have been paranoia, but I ended up tossing my clothes the backpack I used to carry to work. I even tented my car for 3 days. That was fun to kill any bugs that may have hitched a ride. Deloused myself and my dog too, just to be safe, and cleaned my whole house like I was expecting the queen for dinner. I wasn't taking any chances with bugs that make a living by sucking blood, and B were somehow surviving in a medical lab that had God knows what going on in it. Story 39. I ran the pay-to-use wireless internet used at around 800 hotels. We had to implement a website tracking tool. Over 25 of internet usage was. Depending on the time of day, nighttime, that amount would jump up to over 50. And some people would spend just hours looking at and going to dozens of websites. We're talking people spending 5 hours just watching. Story 40. We received an alert that a remote desktop server was using 100 of its RAM, and CPU usage was at 90. This is not normal and very troubling. We start checking on the server, and one of the end users that was logged into it was streaming 5 different French-made videos at the same time. This RDS was only accessible within the office. So the dude was at work watching the Out of Sum, got called out to a site that was 100 offline, arrived on site and the power pole that fed the building was gone, struck by lightning. It took out two switches, the firewall, and half of the workstations. Got called out to a site because the owner's workstation was running really slow. I sat down and started looking at the system and he had 100 of his bandwidth being used. I started poking around and the dude was running LimeWire in 2016, downloading and uploading music at all times. Some nephew set it up for him and turned off the AV. His system was just riddled with viruses. Kept getting calls from a client that in the afternoon their network speeds would tank. We spent a full day looking and checking things, though we had it figured out. The next day, it happened again. So we head back out and start digging into the issue. We see a ton of traffic from one IP address. We check all the workstations and phones, but nothing we can find has that IP address. So we go to the network closet where the main switch and firewall is located. One guy noticed that there was one port on the switch that in the afternoon would come online. And that was when all the network issues would start. So we pulled it, and instantly all the network issues stopped. We traced the cable, and someone had hidden a Bitcoin miner in the bottom of the network closet and buried it under some cabling. Yeah, once they found out who it was, they got fired. Story 41. Not wild, but ridiculous. I drove 40 minutes away to look at a client's computer who said the PC was not responsive. When I arrived, he said, "Look," and pressed a key on the number pad. Nothing happened. I pressed numlock, drove 40 minutes back. A week later, the same customer said his computer was miscalculating formula amounts, so I drove there again. He says, "Look, I type in that I want a pint, and it prints out a formula for 16 ounces. After giving him an elementary math lesson, I drove 40 minutes back again and requested that he have his computer taken away. Story 42. When I was desk-side support years ago, I had an employee in my building come up to me first thing on a Monday morning and hand me a sticky note with the name of a company computer. He says he was traveling the week before and was staying in a hotel. Back then, probably still now, networks in hotels were not really secure and wide open. This was in mid to late 2000s. So the guy connects, and for fun, he looks at what other computers are on the hotel network. He spots one computer that has our office naming convention, so obviously another employee. He opens up the computer and sees that there is a share available on the PC. He opens it up and then sees its bunch of images. Not just normal images, but it is indeed CP for those that don't know inappropriate images of children. He obviously freaks out, doesn't know what to do, so he just writes down the name of the computer. He didn't know who to contact, so he came to IT. I forwarded the information to our director of IT security. It was a relatively new group and he said he could take care of it. I never heard of the fallout. I never asked if anything came from it. I just assumed the person was identified and HTUI were terminated and likely faced CP charges. But for sure one of the wildest thing I've had to deal with. Story 43. Very early in my career, back when I was still working an entry-level job, I had called in sick with stomach flu. I was throwing up every hour to hour and a half, had been all day. I got called by my boss and told it was an emergency, that her computer wasn't working. And she had something she needed done in an hour, so I needed to come in and fix it, sick or not. So, in between bouts of puking, I drove across town and plugged the power cord for her monitor back in. Not even the end in the monitor itself, the end in the wall. She hadn't even taken 2 seconds to make sure it was plugged in before she dragged me in with stomach flu to fix it for her. Story 44. Had to spec out a state-of-the-art, no-limit small computer for the CEO. I give 2 options. One best-in-market skull logo on the front. The other not as good and no skull logo. I submit to my boss, and he says, CEO will probably never go for the skull one as it's unprofessional. I look up a plate to cover and add that in. Like a 10K computer alone, 5K monitor. CEO went for skull icon one without plate because it was best in market and skull looked cool. My boss wasn't happy to be wrong. Story 45. About 25 years ago, working a large multinational company, one of the Italian engineers brought in laptop he had been issued less than a week ago. Were he not an actual person, he would have been an offensive Italian stereotype. My laptop. She no work. He actually said that. Anyway, we take a look at this machine. It had, for the time, an incredibly large 10 GB HD, every kilobyte of which was full of low-res 90s internet. Unless he was downloading it at work or transferred it from another machine, I have no idea how he could have had time to download that much off dial-up. After playing a couple rounds of what was actually a pretty good Tetris variant, we deleted the and gave him back the machine with a warning. That man was truly a pioneer. Story 46. Back when I worked as a help desk tech at a government facility, I was sent on a call to put in new desktop for the office manager as she hated laptops. I set an app time up in Outlook for her, block out an hour off her schedule and swing up there. There she is. A very large elderly office manager sitting in her desk. There under her desk is the tower I was to replace. I introduce myself. She backs her chair up about a foot and says, "Okay, have at it," and powers off her system. I stand there looking at the 1 foot of space between her lap and the spot under her desk. "I am going to have to ask you to slide your chair back as I need to remove and replace the tower," I state. She scooches maybe another foot back and blankly stares at me. So I hold my breath and go down under her desk. That's when I notice the 10-12 filled pee bottles under her desk. Yes, pee in old Gatorade bottles just tucked away under her desk. I ripped the tower out and said I will be back ASAP, I need to clone your hard drive. And GTFO, I sent my intern to go install the new one. Story 47. IT infrastructure. Engineer here. I got two for you. Certain details omitted for NDA reasons. 1. The D-Day data center. Disaster. Literally a 1 in a million kind of incident. Worked for a hosting company with a number of DC's data center around the world. To simply explain, a good DC has backups upon backups of everything including power. So, if the grid goes down, power outage, whatever, there are massive diesel generators that kick on. On top of this, the DC in question was on the priority list for diesel from FEMA, just in case the outage was longer than X days. A delivery driver has a stroke while driving, crashing his tractor trailer into the utility transformer near the DC, knocking the power offline. As our generators kick on, chilling towers start failing, and we have to bring the entire DC offline to avoid literally tens of millions of dollars of damage to equipment. That was a rough day. Above all, we all felt horrible because the driver didn't make it. The second one, some colleagues and I used to call the mostest needful scenarios. This happened multiple times. To provide some context, working night shift, Linux sysad support, we'd get a lot of calls from customers who were doing late-night patching in the US, or somewhat off-hour production work around the world. One of the most infuriating experiences was when we'd get calls where customers would provide next to no information other than these 3 points. 1. Everything is down, and it's all your fault. 2. We are literally losing billions a minute. 3. Please do the needful, hangs up, and then immediately submits a ticket too. A lot of times these issues were simple fixes. Usually needed a simple restart. A Linux proxy was misconfigured, or DNS needed fixing. However, there was one customer who was infamous across our whole org. I'll call him Bob. 2. Bob, the mostest needful. Bob had a truly amazing and uncanny ability for writing the fastest and crappiest code imaginable for his web-based application on his mom-and-pop business website. For those who know languages, it was a horrendous combination of Cobalt, C, and Python. We even made notes on his account for other Linux sysads to expedite helping him when things went inevitably wrong. But it only gets better. Despite dozens of sysads advising him, Bob never made backups of his server. Bob only kept one local copy of his code. He called it his golden code. While it's normal to have a golden copy of code, Bob's copy was dating back at least 5 years. Whenever things broke, he would revert 5 years back and start again fresh. And boy was he proud of it. Bob's desk and microphone seemed to solely exist in a wind tunnel, so he would yell. Even then, it was difficult to understand him partially, not his fault due to language barrier, but also because he would be fighting to get his voice to be heard through the absolute hurricane going on in his office. Bob started every call as if he had just run up a very large mountain in a dead sprint. Despite our network monitoring showing that Bob's site received approximately 800 visitors a day, Bob was somehow losing tens of thousands of dollars a minute every time his code tanked his website. And boy, did he let us know about it. Bob was always snacking. We like to imagine Bob would crack open a new bag of rinds and live a secret life as a wannabe stuntman, specifically the one where Ryan Dunn is seated in that chair behind a jet engine. Bob had an ever-growing family with an ever-changing number of children. As he would put, how can he feed his wife and insert new number here children when we can't keep his site up? At some point, we assumed that he and his wife were going to field their own baseball team. Bob ended every single call with the phrase, "Please do the needful." And to conclude this horrible trip down memory lane, the greatest moments of all. As many know, Black Friday in IT is a deadlock. You don't change code, no updates, nothing. All you want is your site and online store to work so customers can buy stuff. Can't risk it on a day like Black Friday. Well, Bob was better than that. Not once, but on 2 different Black Fridays, Bob brought his site down by pushing updates hours before midnight. I worked as a Mac genius and consultant in the NYC area. I have more stories than I can remember. A few of the greatest hits. A grown man screaming, crying, and headbutting the steel wall in our Apple store because I asked him if he had an appointment. People showing up to Genius Bar appointments absolutely shit-faced drunk at 9:30 in the morning. Computers so dirty, they are literally biohazards. Full-on screaming tantrums by adults who have damaged their stuff after being told they need to pay for repairs or get a new device altogether. Threats of physical violence for a variety of reasons. Devices that have been thoroughly destroyed by water damage from the shower computer, falling out of a fifth-floor window, iPad being bent completely in half, iPod. Tons and tons and tons of water damage, liquid exposure that wasn't water, maple syrup, soy sauce, red wine, vodka, soda. One time, a customer sat at the Genius Bar while his photo library rebuilt, including tons of pictures of him with a variety of women. People who swore up and down that they have been hacked or are being hacked by governments. A customer accidentally deleted their entire macOS partition and all of the pictures of their 1-year-old along with it. He sat at the end of our Genius Bar for probably an hour after our appointment with his head in his hands. On my last day at the Genius Bar, my second-to-last customer wanted me to help them move songs off an iPod, something we were explicitly not allowed to do. I gave him all the requisite hints about how to do it, but that wasn't enough for him, and he got mad. He then demanded that I do it for him. I don't respond well to demands. I told him that this was my last day, and that if he was nice I might have helped him the rest of the way, but now he could leave. Then, I waved over security and had him escorted out, the only occasion I'd done that in my time behind the bar. I helped one last customer since I didn't want to wrap my career with a negative interaction. I have more stories but figured this was enough.